Next, before we do the mirroring option or action, we want to set up the rest of our IK rig so that way our arms and legs are controlled by that IK system. And then we have like a global mover as well. And then we'll mirror and basically we'll get two halves for the price of one. So we want to have everything set up as perfectly as we can before we do that mirroring step. So let's go ahead and set up the IK chain for our arm first. So I'm going to grab, let's say, this bone here, and I'm going to hit, let's see, we need to be in edit mode, so that's good. Shift D to duplicate. I will move, in fact, we can kind of leave the bone exactly where it's at because we're going to change the way it looks. And then with that new bone, we want to unparent from the general hierarchy, so we want to hit Alt P. Let's see, make sure that's there. Alt P, clear parent. And that puts it down here. So now I have wrist left 001. We want to change this to be, we'll call this wrist IK L. There you go. And then let's go into, let's see, we want to be in pose mode. And then we can change that wrist bone to a custom object. I've got a few in here. I've got some icospheres. So I've already got a few. If you need to create an icosphere or you want to create something else to serve as your IK kind of visual aid, go ahead and do that and size it appropriately. Back into edit mode. And then I want to create an elbow as well. So that's this guy here. And this is going to be our pull target if you remember. And we're going to follow the same process. Shift D to duplicate. This one I am going to move off center just a little bit because I feel like it's important to know that that pull target is slightly off center. It's going to be more often than the IK. So I move that one off center just a tad, but same process to Alt P to unparent and then rename elbow IK L. Or we could call this elbow pull L, just so that we kind of know what it's impacting. Because this isn't exactly the IK target, it's more of a pull target modifier. And then let's go back into object mode, pose mode, and let's check its viewport custom object and make that an icosphere as well. Not a light, icosphere. Scale it down a little bit, doesn't need to be too big, and there we go. All right, arms are pretty well set up for the IK targets and what those are, but we haven't actually put in the constraints yet, if you recall. So the constraints are going to happen on the wrist. That's the end of our chain. The fingers are going to be independent. So we don't want the fingers to bend every time the arm moves, because those are on separate kind of rotational axes and controls. So the end of our IK chain for our arm is going to be this wrist bone. So let's go into, I believe it would be, let me double check here, edit mode, and we should see, oops, one moment. Sorry about that. Pose mode for our bone constraints, and then come down to the bone constraint with the wrist selected. Make sure it's not the IK target, make sure it's the wrist, and add a bone constraint for inverse kinematics. The target, if you remember, is going to be our armature because we want this to impact the whole thing. The bone is going to be the IK wrist, but since we have a lot, you'd have to scroll through a bunch, or we could just type in the letters IK, and that will pull up that one pretty quick. So wrist IKL, sure enough. And then the pull target is going to end up being our pull object. So where do we have that one? Let me, oh sorry, pull target is our armature, forgive me. I always forget that step. And then the bone is going to be the pull. So we should have that here somewhere. Let me just type in P-O-L-E, elbow, pull, left. There we go. Now, when we did those steps, our rig kind of went a little bit bonkers. And that's a few things that we'll have to change to correct for that. One is, right now it's using the tail of our bones, and in this particular rig we don't want it to use the tail. So you can see how it kind of like nudged the rig to use the end of the bone, and we want it to actually be at the beginning of our wrist bone. So just checking this, can you see how it's moving the IK target to the wrist versus like the end of the wrist? So turn off use tail. The other thing is we want to control the chain length, because right now it's going all the way through to its parent, and we don't want it to actually impact the spine. We only want it to impact, say, the shoulder. So our chain length is going to be different than 0. So the instant I type the chain length to 1, things look a lot better, don't they? And so what's happening here, if you kind of understand it, is the IK was going all the way back to messing with the hips, and we simply want it to impact the wrist, the bicep, the elbow, the shoulder, and that's about it. And in fact, if you're looking here, I don't actually really want it to impact the shoulder. I don't think that looks too great. So I'm going to back it off, leave the shoulder where it's at. That'll be manually controlled. But the IK chain will impact everything from the bicep through to the wrist, which looks pretty good to me. So now we'll just do a quick check to make sure things haven't exploded, and grab my icosphere. And when I move it up and down, hey, things are looking pretty good. Now in the other views, I want to bend it inward, and you can see that when I bend it inward, it's breaking the elbow, and that is a perfect opportunity for my pull target to take over and bend it in a way that's more pleasing. But before I do that, I want to make sure that one thing is set. I'm going to move this in just a bit, and I'm going to go into my bone constraint, and I'm going to take the pull angle and I'm going to make it -90. I'm just going to move that around because I want that pull angle to naturally bend where the elbow is. And so that might require just a little bit of, looks like -120. So that way when I move my pull angle later on, it'll give me a little bit more realistic, close connected control over where my elbow is, right? So you can change that starting pull angle so that way when you bend your arm by default, it bends on a natural elbow line versus like an unnatural one. All right, pretty good so far. Good time for you to save if you'd like. And then I'm going to make one more change. Let's go ahead and reset this. So I'm going to Alt-G to undo the move position, and I'm going to Alt-G on this to undo its move position. And there's one more thing that we're going to add, and that's a rotation follow. And this is kind of a trend that I'm seeing with a few Blender rigging artists, just because when we get into posing this object, we can pose the hand by hand if we want to. But if you're moving your IK target around and you want to rotate, like say the hand, if you rotate your IK target, nothing happens. It doesn't impact anything. It's only impacted by position. And that's because we need to add a follow modifier to the constraint. All right, so let's get into our wrist bone. Let's go to our bone constraints, and we're going to add one more constraint. And that's going to look something like this. We're going to add this copy rotation constraint, and we're going to set it up in this way. So I'm going to take that off, and then we'll do that step together. So grab your wrist. We're going to add bone constraint. We're going to copy rotation, because that's what we want. We want the rotation from our IK. And then we're going to choose the target. Can you guess what that is? It's not the wrist, it's not the IK, it's the armature once again. Then we're going to pick the bone, and this one is the wrist IK. And it's going to copy all of the rotation data from the wrist IK to this bone, which is great. So that way, if we're in here animating and I'm moving my wrist IK and I want to rotate my hands, I can do that just by rotating the wrist IK versus having to deselect and reselect the wrist bone. It's a small detail, but I feel like it's a little bit more natural workflow and something that I'm seeing with a lot of Blender artists present day. Great. We can reset this by Alt-R, should reset that rotation. And now we're ready to do our leg. So let's do the same process of setting up the IK on our knees. And here we go. We'll see if we can do this one quickly. All right, so we've got a, let's see. The IK target is going to be down here in the ankle. So let's just go ahead and Shift D. Let's get into edit mode first. Shift D. Right click to drop the bone right there. rename ankle L001, and this is going to be leg IK L. And we are going to also Alt-P to clear parent on that bone. And if you notice, all of our IK are just going to be sitting down here unparented, which is kind of convenient and nice. Pose mode. With that bone selected, go into its bone properties, custom object, icosphere, size is up to you. That looks pretty good actually. All right, back into edit. And now we need to make our knee pull target. So we're going to duplicate our knee, Shift D. I'm going to move it off to the left just a little bit because it's going to sit kind of in the front where the kneecap is. Alt-P to clear parent. Rename our knee to knee pull, capital L. Again, putting capital L on everything is going to allow us to do that mirror later on. Pose mode, custom viewport display, custom object in the bone properties, icosphere. Maybe shrink it down if you really want to. Doesn't really matter to me. All right, setting up the IK system. I've got the ankle bone selected. I'm going to go into bone constraints. I'm in pose mode. I'm going to grab inverse kinematics. And now, having done this a few times, this drilling is not accidental. It really helps you remember. Target's going to be armature. Bone's going to be my leg IKL. Pull target is going to be armature. Pull bone is going to be the knee pull. And man, we got this whipped up really quickly. What we haven't done yet is we haven't messed with chain length because goodness, we don't want this thing going all kinds of nuts. So let's just back this up and let's see, how many bones do we want this to mess with? Let's see here, let me get in this one. So right now we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, all right. Looking good. Looks like we might have some pull angle issues, so let's rotate this guy back. What do we got? Negative 120 perhaps? We've got some interesting issues with the foot that we might need to straighten out. I think this might be something with the hip. It just didn't rotate out as comfortably as I had expected. So I just kind of repositioned that. It's still in kind of okay shape, but we've got some pull angle issues. So I got to get that corrected before I give up. We want to make sure that the toe is pointed straight. So it looks like negative 90 is going to be my pull angle preference there. All right, looking pretty good. So now I've got my IK, I bend it up, the knee bends. I've got my knee and I can turn that inside or outside. So that's looking pretty good too. Nearly there. I know it's been kind of a long process, but we're nearly there. So I've looked over everything. I've moved some things around, just a quick double check, but we've got our pulls and our IKs set up for all the right side. So I think we're good for this step. And now we'll move on to mirroring and finishing the rig.